Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Fresh Wave Podcast. This is Season 4, Episode 17, and we are talking about modesty. We hope you have a great week and enjoy this.
And Johnny.
I'm sorry.
Let's keep it. Are we rolling, Tim? Oh, cool. Well, this is an awesome time to be here. The weather has been warm. Everyone's getting some natural vitamin D, and seasonal depression is hopefully going bye-bye for most of us. So good to be here with a first time on the show, the other Nasta. Katie, welcome. Glad to have you here. And then we got returning Jacob in the house.
Thank you. Glad to be on.
Let's go. And then, as always, our co-host over here. Per usual. Maddie Kudia. Welcome.
Yep.
Yeah, so looking forward to something very new that we've never really talked about. And something, I don't know if it's taboo or if it's just like very, very subjective. You know, this is going to be a very subjective topic. So maybe that's why it's kind of tough to talk about. But looking forward to our discussion on... What are we talking about? Modesty. That's right. Okay, make sure we're all on the same page here. But yeah, it's going to be fun. So welcome to the show. Fresh Wave Podcast. Yep. We're back at it.
We're back.
So I think we should start off by kind of getting a general definition of modesty, what we think it to be for like physically and also our hearts. I also think modesty can sometimes be looked down on in society. It's something that is not embraced as much as anything else. And I think that's particularly probably because society is generally identity addicted. I think people are so honed in on putting everything, like your taste and your acquisition, on display because you want people to know who you are. And whether that's through like your body, your culture, or politics, family, relationships, all of those things, people like to just put on a pedestal, put through the megaphone, and just make that your personal identity. So we're told to just accentuate our best features, to get what we want out of life and stand up for ourselves, express ourselves in any way possible. And so I think modesty can sometimes combat that. So just thinking of a general definition of modesty, if you guys had any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I wrote down something I was discussing with my friend, Modesty. So what I wrote down is that modesty is holding yourself in a way to avoid people seeking worldly things in you. So that doesn't mean specifically the way you dress, but it's more what you put out into the world.
Yeah, I think modesty can be like where we place our identity, and just like the behavior of what we think our true like purpose is and our true place of service. And for Christians, that's for us to not boast in ourselves, but to boast in God. So our true service to the world is to boast about God and to make him known. So that's just, our modesty should be remembering that. It's almost like an offspring of like humility, I think, keeping our place, remembering us to be humble, and just evaluating ourselves and our behavior properly.
All right, so that was going to be my question was, do you see modesty and humility, similar things, same things, different? How would you compare, contrast those two words? Because I do feel like they kind of like the fact, I was going to bring it up, but then you brought it up, so it kind of shows that might be some interrelationship here. So how would you compare the two of modesty and humility? Because I do feel like I kind of fall under the same thing sometimes.
Yeah, that's something I really looked at when I was thinking about this topic. I was thinking that one of the verses I came across was Luke 14:11, which is, "For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted." So I think when you really want to think about these two things, modesty is a lot about not trying to draw unnecessary attention to yourself. And I think it's very easy in this like culture, like you mentioned earlier, just to try to draw attention to ourselves. But I think it's important as Christians to try to draw attention to God rather than ourselves.
Yeah, so do you think this is kind of like when we talk about modesty, this is kind of always a thought I have. And again, I do think it's kind of subjective. And that's why I think this is a tough subject. But consider this as an option for when we talk about modesty, right? You're in a room and somebody walks in and it's a guy coming in with a cut off sleeveless shirt. And the guy's just absolutely yoked out of his mind. Just biceps and triceps are just huge. Comes in, veins popping. I mean, this guy just hit a good arm day, right? And then I'm sure there would be thoughts that would come up, right? For other guys and girls as they walked in. Another guy comes in. This guy is thin as anything, has no muscular definition, wears the exact same outfit. I think most of us would react differently to the same outfit based off of the person, right? So that's just my personal experience, right? Guy comes in, hit in the gym, you're like, all right, dude, kind of a show off. Like, we get it. You hit arms. But if a guy came in and has, no muscle definition, very skinny, whatever, we're not going to be like, really, dude, you're showing off. Like,
Yeah.
I do feel like there's a general reaction that's different considering on what the person, I guess, who the person is or what
Yeah.
they look like. Because I do think that is a general thing that I've noticed is like, we actually don't care as much if we're talking about like modesty and dress, right? Specifically, I do feel like there's a difference based off of what the person is showing
Yeah.
or wearing in that.
I
that
agree.
state.
I think in those certain circumstances, like the person themselves almost has to ask themselves, like, is it helpful to me and my soul? Is it helpful to others? Like, you kind of have to take all those things into account. And as Christians, like, we're also not called to just turn a blind eye to things and be like, yeah, like, I'm totally unaware that society is viewing me this way, or like, this is attractive to society or not attractive. It's important to be aware, like, hey, like, this is obviously something that will draw attention to me. And if my presence right now is drawing attention to myself, and it's not serving God in the way it should, just letting ourselves recognize our desire for attention might be overruling our desire to, like, for truth that God has spoken over us. So whether the truth is like our body is a temple, or just like our purpose is for his glory, I have Galatians 5:13, which is, for you are called to freedom, brothers. Only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. So just keeping our presence helpful to other people as well. So I think there are some questions that I go through in my head, and I think other people should when they're, whether it's what they're wearing or what they're posting on social media or what they're saying about a certain hobby they have or sport they have, or however they're letting pride get in the way. So that also goes back to humility as well.
Mm-hmm. Katie, can you say what you said in the beginning, what you wrote down? I really like that, but I gotta hear it again so I can kind of remember it.
Modesty is holding yourself in a way to avoid people seeking worldly things in you.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's good. I like that. I haven't really
I
heard
like
it
that
said in
too.
that way before, because that's applied to, because even when we were talking before, we are like, all right, let's talk about modesty. Obviously the
Yeah.
go-to is like, all right, girls and how they dress. That's what we're going to talk about. But there's a lot more than that, right? The modesty can apply to
Yeah.
guys and girls.
Completely.
And we were trying to talk about, like, all right, for guys, like, what are topics that come up? We're kind of talking about, I was talking about like modesty and almost like possessions. Like,
Yeah.
would it be immodest of me to own $1 million Bugatti? Is that wrong, right? Would that be me not being modest in like how I spend my money? Is that just showing off in a sense? And then we had one other thing we were talking about. I can't remember.
What's it? I think we said what we own, and also like I think it's how we display ourselves to the world. We talk about that.
Yeah. Right. And how we display ourselves to the world as well, which kind of hits right up with your definition there.
Yeah, I would say another thing about like modesty, you're talking about the humility aspect and how we display ourselves, is the Bible talks about not boasting ourselves but boasting in Christ. And I think if, like you're saying about the world and about, we want that modesty is not putting ourselves in a way that is worldly, right? So if we're boasting ourselves and boasting in ourselves and are in the world, that is not going to be modesty. That's not putting out a picture of Christ. It's putting out a picture of ourselves and us as great. And I think you see throughout the Bible, like in Acts 14 and then in Acts 3, you see some of the apostles where they go and heal someone to do some great act, and then they immediately point back to God, and everyone's like, whoa, you guys are so cool. They're like, no, this is God. So I think modeling that of, I'm not trying to say like just like talk down about yourself or never talk about yourself, but I think in the sense of just trying to point to God in what we do rather than pointing to ourselves.
Yeah, almost like genuinely enjoying being in the background of things when we're serving the needs of others and we're making Jesus like put on the center stage, like we are making him most known. So just genuinely coming to love and desire to praise God when people ask, who are you? What's your identity? And learning to put Jesus at the forefront of that.
So how can we each day think through modesty and all these things? Like, what's something we can kind of daily remind ourselves?
I think modesty, it really boils down to your intentions.
Hmm.
So with your analogy with like the really buff guy in the muzzle shirt, if his intention was to...
He's not a real guy, by the way. Just
Yeah.
I'm not thinking of anyone. Go
If
ahead.
his intention was to like really show off his muscles, that would be immodest. But if he wore the muscle shirt because it was comfortable on him, he was hot, it was easy for him to work out in it, I would say that would be modest. It really boils down to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, also the opposite of that, like you can be covering up like every inch of your body in modesty and still have an immodest heart. And you can still be choosing to pick things to either wear or say that draws like pride and attention to yourself, even if you're wearing completely modest clothes. So just like it's the subtle ways that I think we ask for attention in our daily lives that we can just bring to our attention, bring to our awareness, and make sure that we're focusing on our hearts being modest first. I think that also puts out a lot of fruit of just being modest in every area of our life, especially clothing as well.
Yeah, it's just like, I don't know what, it's such a hard topic because it's
Yeah.
so like, all right, hey, let's get 20 different, girls and give them like, hey, here's 20 different dresses. Tell me which ones are modest.
Yeah.
Right? You're all going to say different things.
Yeah,
Right? Or
totally.
bathing suits, whatever. And I was even just thinking about like possessions. Like I might think a $120,000 Porsche is unnecessary and immodest. But someone might look at me and say, well, what you have is immodest, depending where they're from. So like, there's just always like this constant, there's always like a little bit, a different level depending on your background, where you're from, what you grew up with. So it's like, it's always such a challenging subject because I do feel like it's just such a different, everyone has different thoughts
think-
going into it.
It's also important to just start at the core of things, honoring him with our heart, and everything else from head to toe will cover itself. Just focusing on how, like, there's nothing in the Bible that's very, like, thou shalt not wear, like, that's why it's difficult to talk about, because it's not like these shorts are too short and you're kind of going through your closet or going through your clothing and trying to figure that out. But the most important thing is that we focus of modesty at its core, which is the essence of just shining Christ and being the fragrance of Christ. Also, I think we talked about a few weeks ago in one of the sermons. But just like having that fragrance of Christ and just letting our presence here serve to draw attention to him.
Okay, well, so let's say, let's go off your analogy, or not your analogy, just kind of going off of, all right, this guy's wearing this, he feels comfortable. Let's say his heart was in the right place.
Yeah.
Let's say you apply that to any other thing, right? You're purchasing a crazy expensive car, the clothes you're wearing, or, whatever it is. What if someone's just kind of naive in a sense where it's like, oh, like this $1 million Bugatti, like how would that be drawing attention to myself? Or I'm wearing a certain clothing that's completely revealing of certain things. Like, what do you do with that? Where like, all right, their heart is truly maybe innocent, but they just don't know, like everyone is staring at your car. Everyone's staring at you and is drawing to worldly things.
Yeah.
Like, do you think they should kind of just have like I mean, it'd probably be healthy, right? To almost have someone you can kind of go to and be like, hey, I'm thinking about buying this, or I'm thinking about wearing this.
Yeah.
Do you think this is going to draw attention to myself? Like, I don't know. Do you think like that's helpful, or like how would you go about that so that your own blindness, or again, like how you were raised, like your parents are different than your parents, different than my parents. Like we all probably have different opinions on that. So what do you think? Do you think it would be wise to kind of have some people kind of speak into a subjective thing like this?
Yeah, I'd say so. I think the Bible in a couple spots talks about not living our lives in a way that causes others to stumble in their relationship with Christ. So I think if we don't think we can figure it out on our own, maybe asking someone, but thinking through it, because you might not be doing it with an immodest heart, but again, it was talking about, a lot of it talks about the foods offered to idols, and there's a lot of stuff culturally with that. And then it's saying that even if you are not sinning by doing this, but if it's causing someone else to stumble, if it's causing someone else to be weak in their faith because of what you're doing, and you still do it, that's a problem on you, even if your intentions were not bad. Like, I think there's a common quote is, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and I think we have to be careful with, oh, I didn't mean to do this. Well, like you said, if I get a $1 million Bugatti and I'm driving it, like, you have to at least think like someone's probably gonna like look at me in a certain way because of this.
Yeah, totally. I think again with like the Bugatti analogy,
I love how that's still sticking to this
Yeah.
conversation.
it really boils down to your intentions. So let's say you just you want the Bugatti because you think it looks nice, not to others but to you. In that instance, I feel like it would be modest to get it as long as you're really not flexing it on other people.
It's more of a garage kind of car.
Yeah, it also might be like more of like what you're feeding. Like I think when you're feeding your ego, like your ego craves that. Like you want to be noticed, you want to get that attention from other people, and you're looking at like the heart of the matter. Like, are you purchasing this thing? Are you talking about this thing because you want to feed your ego? Like you kind of want to feel good about yourself. Like you're feeding that pride. But I mean, it's at the core of every human. Like, of course, we want to feel validated. We want to feel like we have attention. But our sole desire is to kind of just let our sole desire should be to let ourself like fade into the background, and let Jesus like take over our whole self, and that becomes our whole identity. So even when we're talking about giving up like certain things, like certain pieces of clothing and certain cars, like all of us should really be consumed by God. And in any way that we're feeding things like pride and our ego and selfishness, those are all things that damage our relationship, that cause us to stumble with God personally, and with other people around us.
I think the other reason we don't like to talk about this topic is not just because it's subjective, but also because I feel like you see a lot of the two extremes. Like you sometimes feel like, oh, I can't talk about myself at all. Like I can never say what's about what's going on or what I like doing because I don't want to be like trying to draw attention to myself. And then you can also get the people like, yeah, it just doesn't really matter. And neither of those are right. And I think there's also an element too of with dress. So it's just, even if you're drawing attention to ourselves, are we dressing for an occasion? Are we dressing to respect what we're doing to? Like I think if we're going to church, we should dress nice. I think there's an element of, okay, this is an important thing. But I also think if you just walk out of your like house in a tuxedo every morning, you're like, okay, you're probably trying to draw attention to yourself. So I think just really trying to think through some of that is always good. And if you're talking about yourself in a conversation, just think, okay, one, why am I doing this? And also how much? It's just like all the times, all I talk about is myself and what I do. Or is it, okay, this is something I want to bring up or thought this person might find interesting. I think it's not a horrible thing to talk about yourself. I just think we have to be careful with it. Like there's so many things we just need to do in moderation.
That's what I was thinking of. We talked about that. That was good.
Okay.
That was good. Yeah, because I think we were also talking about like, you know, if LeBron James was being interviewed and he's like, yeah, I'm just like so bad at basketball. You know, let's not talk about me. I'm really not that good. Like, dude, that's not a modesty. Like,
It's almost
like,
fishing for compliments.
yeah. It's almost like, you know, some people talk poorly to actually draw attention to themselves in a sense. So I think, right, there has to be, I think one is just self-awareness is really good. And then, like you said, just kind of being aware, like, do I talk about myself? Am I the only person we talk about when I hang out with Jacob? Like we just watched the movie, the Disney movie Soul.
Oh yeah.
It has some controversies, whatever. But I do remember this one part of the movie where the main guy's like the cat, and he goes into the barber shop to get his hair cut, and the 22 whatever is him, and they're cutting hair and they're leaving. And they talked about so many cool things. And the barber was like, oh, so cool. We talked about all this other stuff other than jazz. And the guy, I guess, always just talked about himself and jazz. And he was like, oh, well, why did we never talk about jazz before? He's like, oh, you never asked. Like, we never tried to talk about other things. So I think we have to be aware of like, all right, do we only talk about me? Or do I only talk about my certain things, whatever? So I think that, again, is really healthy in reflecting on yourself when it comes to modesty. About yourself, like in conversation and the topic of conversation as well. That's a good point. So I had a verse. I was trying to think through like your definition, like what verse would come to my mind. Yeah. And one that we actually memorized on the retreat, which was Matthew 16:24. Jesus told his disciples, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, pick up his cross and follow me. So I think that kind of aligns with what you're saying. All right, I'm about to put this outfit on, or I'm about to buy this thing, or I'm about to enter into a conversation. Am I denying myself in that moment? I think that's like a legit question we should probably ask ourselves. Or are we trying to put ourselves out there and, you know, draw attention to worldly things in myself? So that'd be a verse I think would align with that, with this topic.
Yeah, I have another verse that I was planning to read. I didn't write the whole thing on my note card, so I'm just going to pull it up.
Let's go.
It is 1 Peter 3:3, and it is, "Do not let your adorning be external, the braiding of your hair and putting on of gold jewelry or the clothing you wear, but let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious." So I think it's pretty clear that it's not about the outside, but it's about the inside.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. I do think we focus so much on the outside.
Totally.
We just there's so much work that we each could put in, like on the inside. Like some of us are so we'll spend hours in front of the mirror, hours in the gym. It's like, yo, what you really need to do is like look at your heart. That's what I need to do. That's what a lot of us need to do. We never spend time in front of our inside soul's mirror, if there was one. But I can't agree more with that.
I feel like checking our heart is something that it just relates to so many things in Christianity. I don't think it's just modesty. I don't think it's there's a whole number of things. You could be sinning because of one thing or another. A lot of it, you really have to look at your heart and really look at the why at the bottom of it, like look at the root of the problem. I think there's so many things that are like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. This is a good topic.
Yeah.
I feel like there's like so many other thoughts. I feel like there should be like a part 2.
Yeah, we could do part 2.
Like I have so many other like things I'm trying to like put into words, but yeah.
So to finish off, I would just like to give encouragement to anyone struggling with immodesty or modesty in general, and just remind us in our hearts that the favor and approval of God through Jesus is 10,000 times more valuable than any attention or pride that can come from the world.
How do you know? Sorry, I know that was like the ending thing, but then you made me think of something.
Okay, we can cut
You
this
said
in
those
before.
struggling with immodesty.
Yeah.
Do people know they're struggling with immodesty? Like, is that something we know? I feel like that's something like we probably don't know.
Yeah, I think for me and a few of I've had Christian friends before who I think it's almost a slow process where you start to go through things or you start to wear things. Like the more time you spend abiding in Jesus and the more time you spend getting to know him and his heart, the more I think I used to put on things and be like, this doesn't feel right. Like you sort of get more conviction about it.
Do you really? Okay.
Yeah. I think, and it was a slow process for me because I slowly weeded things out of my closet.
Wow.
And so I think you do start to notice it the more time you spend with God. And it can become a struggle because if you don't want to give that up, if you feel like this is really supportive to who I am, this is really supportive to me having all of these friends or even me having a relationship, if this is something that's supporting all of that, once I let that go, that whole system will fail. So I think it's just learning and coming to know God and all of that. You start to realize I'll need to pick these things out, or same thing with you when you struggle with lust or you struggle with anything else. I think it's a similar struggle.
Bam. Sorry. That's like the PS at the end of a letter. Yes.
Yeah.
That's a wrap.